Hello, and welcome back to another wacky, zany, somewhat random video about a random little bit of UK trivia. Now, I'm a big fan of theme parks. And, of course, one of our premier theme parks here in the UK is Alton Towers. And I'm going to today explain the history of the secret weapons of Alton Towers. Now, let's go into a little bit of context here with our theme parks here. Okay. This is Disneyland. Or is it Disney World? I can't remember. The one in California. This is the castle that they have. And this is Alton Towers. It is a actual stately home. Which, let's see here. An Iron Age fort was built on Bunbury Hill around 700 AD. It was besieged by King Eyre of Wessex in 716 AD. Alton Lodge was built in the 17th century on this site as a home for the Earl of Shrewsbury. Alton Lodge was renamed to Alton Towers sometime in the 1800s. In the 1890s, the site's gardens were opened to the public, eventually leading to the theme park that we know today. Yes, that's right. If you really wanted to be pedantic about it, you could trace Alton Towers' history back to 700 AD. Which is frankly quite ridiculous if you look at American theme parks, where the most you could trace it back to is about the 1940s. Speaking of the 1940s, actually, fun fact, Alton Towers was requisitioned by the military during the Second World War, where the lake in front of the towers was used as training for troops on troop transports, such as the ones that would later be used in Italy and Normandy. So that's a little fun bit of trivia there. But anyway, the secret weapons. What are the secret weapons? So, we do need a little bit of history here. It is the 1980s at Alton Towers, and new laws are coming into place. Meaning rides such as these two, the Thunderlooper and the Alton Beast, could no longer run in the park, as part of these new laws were the heritage laws, which would go on to class Alton Towers, as in the actual towers themselves, as a Grade 2 listed building. For those unfamiliar, this means that the original sightlines planned for the towers had to remain. You couldn't just build a massive roller coaster behind them. It would ruin the original intention of the architect of the towers to do such a thing. Therefore, Alton Towers had to get creative, hence the secret weapons. And when I mean that, I don't mean that the Alton Towers Resort started a nuclear arsenal, as funny as that would be. Now, the secret weapons refers to a number of different attractions that the park has released throughout the years. So, let's get started on our history then, with Secret Weapon 1. So, Secret Weapon 1 was first going under construction in 1991. A massive pit was begun to be dug for where it would be, and it was believed it was going to be an Arrow pipeline coaster. And the layout was already planned out. They got permission from authorities to do such a thing. However, this quickly derailed. This will not be the last roller coaster pun in this video. I am sorry for that. But anyway, they decided this was not going to work. And so they went back to the drawing board and decided to try again in 1992 with Secret Weapon 2, which, following the trend, was also going to be an Arrow pipeline coaster. But when John Wardley, the main roller coaster architect for Alton Towers, went out and rode the prototype, he hated it, and this project caught on fire quicker than the Big Dipper. Which leads us on to Secret Weapon 3. A little thing called NEMESIS.
NEMESIS, the awesome new ride at Alton Towers. Sit back, it's fright time.
Secret Weapon 3, as you've just seen, is NEMESIS. Now, the history behind this ride is really quite interesting, because after the first two failed attempts of a secret weapon, John Wardley and Alton Towers were not very willing to continue this whole affair. That was until Wardley was called up by some friends who were working at Six Flags Great America. They had been working to build an incredibly revolutionary new ride, Batman. Yes, Batman the Ride. Manufactured by Bolliger and Mabillard, this was the first suspended looping roller coaster in the world. And very quickly, after riding Batman, Wardley got into contact with Bolliger and Mabillard to bring such an innovation to the UK. And in 1993, construction began on NEMESIS. The story behind the ride was going to be that an alien creature had landed in this pit, and the military had placed around all of these steel girders and such to keep it contained, stop it from breaking out. The NEMESIS creature would also send out feelers every now and again to bring in nutrients from the surrounding area to keep itself alive, that being the trains that you ride on. I've mentioned the pit, and this goes back into those heritage laws, because of course Alton Towers is well aware that to build such a ride, it would have to be quite tall to have the momentum to go around the full circuit. However, they could of course not build above the trees, per the agreements of the laws around the towers, and so they got a bunch of dynamite, and they blew up a massive hole. And many of those rocks would then later be used in the construction around the Congo River Rapids and the Katanga Canyon area of the park. Which is very interesting. If you go to the towers today, you might actually be looking at some rocks that used to be where NEMESIS is now stood. Well, not stood right now, as it is currently going through a retrack service and maintenance this year. So the ride is not in operation this year, but it should be back for next year for its 30th anniversary, which is an incredible achievement for a roller coaster such as itself, to be able to run for such a long time. And so to finish out our segment here on the first secret weapon to actually come to fruition, let's have a look-see, shall we? And honestly, for a 30-year-old ride, she runs surprisingly well, as you can see there. So, this brings us on to the next secret weapon, with Nemesis proving that this was a viable way to market the park. There soon became talks for what was next, and a pattern would soon emerge. May I introduce Secret Weapon 4, Oblivion.
Oblivion, the world's first vertical drop roller coaster at Alton Towers.
Oblivion was opened in 1998. Following the trend of Nemesis, it was manufactured by Bolliger and Mabillard and was their first ever dive coaster. Although, being the first, it meant there was a lot of issues. While Oblivion often marketed itself as the world's first vertical drop roller coaster, a vertical drop would have to be 90 degrees. Being the first of its kind and not having drive tires that could actually withstand a 90-degree angle, Oblivion is a mere 88 degrees, just shy of being vertical. But nonetheless, it was an impressive feat at the time. And so construction soon began on the ride in the area known as X Sector. And just like with Nemesis, as you can see, there was a lot of digging that had to be done to be able to fit the ride in just below that tree line. Oblivion has continued to operate from that day, and while many would call it lacking in its ride experience, it is nonetheless an enjoyable ride at the park. Plus, well, it had some very interesting marketing as well. This is not a fake image. These are sold on park. Anyway, to round this section off on Oblivion, there is not really too much to talk about it here. It hasn't really had much of a storied history. It was the second to Nemesis. It kind of gets overshadowed in that sense. It's nonetheless a nice addition to Towers' lineup. And so let's finish this with an on-ride POV. Just ignore that heap of metal in the background. We'll get to that one soon. And you can see what I mean about people not really thinking it's the best ride experience in the park. It really is leaning into its gimmick as having a vertical drop. Unlike many future dive coasters that would be built, such as Yukon Striker or Baron 80. Yeah. Is it 1789? I always get that one a bit confused. But yeah. With the sinister and military undertones of the previous two secret weapons, Secret Weapon 5 would be a breath of fresh air. I probably am going to get shot for these puns at some point. And so that brings us to Secret Weapon 5 Air. Now, as previously mentioned, with the military themes of the previous two secret weapons, Towers decided to go for a much more friendlier theme. While Nemesis and Oblivion were billed as villains, Air would be a hero. And this was reflected in the original concept of the area it was going to be in, a land of oases and just bright sunniness. However, when construction started, it was quickly apparent that they would not have the budget to be able to pull all of that off. Now, while Air is billed as the world's first flying coaster, that would actually go to the Skytrack at Granada Studios, Birmingham, that had had a brief existence. However, Air would go on to be the first one designed by Bolliger and Mabillard to be able to do a full circuit, and of course not just be single seat, a single rider ride, having full trains that would go between a standing up position and a flying position inside the station before the ride departed. Air itself would then pave the way for many other B&M flying coasters, such as, famously, Manta at SeaWorld Orlando. So, you kind of owe us for that one. In 2016, Air would be rebranded as Galactica. And with this new theming came an innovation in technology that was relatively stupid in my opinion. And that was VR. Yeah, I don't get the appeal. You're on a roller coaster already. Why do you need VR? I mean, I get that the VR synchronized the ride experience with a film about flying in space, but it's still incredibly stupid. Air was a good enough ride already that it really didn't need VR, and with some of the theming that they've done to brand it as Galactica, it has improved the ride quite a bit. Yeah, I cannot really shake the feeling that it was a bit of a wrong move to do VR, especially since it's now all gone. And so, let's see this ride in action now, shall we? And so, as that ride on Air, now Galactica, comes to an end, it's time to move forwards in time to my favourite secret weapon in the park. And yes, this brings us now to Secret Weapon 6. 13. By the mid-2000s, Alton Towers was having a little bit of an identity crisis. They had been bought out by Merlin Entertainment, who now owned a number of theme parks across the UK. For example, they owned Legoland Windsor, a family park. They also owned Fort Park, a more frill, teenager-oriented park. Where into this would Alton Towers fit? At first, they wanted to go for the family audience, and as such, the Secret Weapon moniker was dropped altogether for the next few additions into the park, Spinball Whizzer and Rita Queen of Speed. However, by 2008, they were beginning to plan something new, a return to that old classic, the Secret Weapons. Something began to emerge in the themed land of Ugland when, in 2008, there was significant work put in place for something new, coming on the site of the much beloved Corkscrew. Something new was coming. I've said that already. On the site of the beloved Corkscrew, work was beginning to take place. The Corkscrew had been one of Alton's premier attractions through the 80s and 90s, but had begun to show its age towards the end. And so, it was ceremoniously given one final day where you could ride it as many times as you want and get some special memorabilia, and it was then taken down. But not in its entirety. If you have visited the Alton Towers Resort, you have probably seen this little thing here. Yes, that is the Corkscrew from Corkscrew. Proudly presented there at the front of the park, welcoming guests, a little bit of Alton Towers history placed there forever to honour the future of the park. Now, the ride that was going to replace Corkscrew was being developed by Intamin, which was a first for the Secret Weapons project, as of course the first previous 3 attempts that had actually gone through had all been built by Bolliger and Mabillard. 13 was going to be different, and as 2008 rolled into 2009, construction on the ride began. The marketing around this particular ride was interesting, to say the least. The ride had 2 adverts, a pre-watershed and post-watershed version, and it was billed as a horror ride. And as the ride got closer and closer to completion, this seemed to be more and more of the truth, as it was even reported that to even ride the ride, you would have to sign a waiver. Now, of course, 13 is very much not a ride that requires a waiver. But it is clear that the ride was incredibly overhyped. However, it does feature a very interesting first world element. It was billed as the world's first psycho coaster, something that Alton Towers has eventually dropped. in favour of the more fitting title, the world's first freefall drop coaster. Partway through the ride, the train enters a room and is stopped. The floor then jolts slightly down before dropping 20 feet in a freefall. A very interesting feature of a ride, I must say. And it is why it's one of my favourite rides in the park, because despite it being open for 13 years now, kind of ironically, there are still people who do not know about this. And sometimes you're lucky to get on the same ride as them. And you can just watch them be absolutely confused and terrified. It's fun. And speaking of watching the ride, and here is our drop track section. And so, while 13's marketing had been, let's say, unlucky, it was nothing compared to the tragedy that was to befall Secret Weapon 7.
From Alton Towers regarding that accident on the ride called the Smiler. This is the statement. It says there has been an incident on the Smiler this afternoon involving two carriages coming together on a low section of the track. One of the carriages was empty and the other had 16 guests in. The resort is fully qualified with first responders who are on the scene immediately to assist with the evacuation, which is ongoing. Remember, of course, this accident happened at just 2:09 this afternoon, is still underway. The area has been closed to allow for access to emergency services vehicles. To ensure the safe and timely evacuation of guests, a platform is being constructed. This will be taking a few minutes, but will enable us to proceed more quickly. There will be a full investigation once we have recovered the guests who are our priority. That statement coming in from Alton Towers within the last few minutes. So what we do know from West Midlands Ambulance, reiterated there by the Alton Towers statement, 16 people involved. They were on that ride when the collision took place. 4 have suffered serious injuries. There are 4 West Midlands ambulances in attendance, air ambulance and other medics. It happened at 2:09 this afternoon. So Richard, as we were just talking about there before we got that statement, there'll be a huge rescue mission going on to get those people off that ride.
So, this does bring us to Secret Weapon 7, the one that probably has the most tragic history to it. The Smiler.
Join us. Smiler. The Smiler, the world's first 14-looping roller coaster. Book now at altontowers.com.
And so, the Smiler. And be warned, this is going to show accident images. With towers moving forwards with the times, it meant that, just like with the previous secret weapon, an old legacy ride would be removed to make way for this one. This, of course, being the Black Hole, a ride that had stood next to Oblivion for many, many years, and after its closure had also served a purpose for the park's Halloween events, Scarefest, where it had been converted into a scare maze on multiple occasions. This new secret weapon would be built by Gerstlauer, and in its original plans it would take on a very industrial look, really leaning into the same theming as Oblivion. And soon after, work would begin on Secret Weapon 7, the Smiler. However, when construction started, it became clear that this original theming had gone away in exchange for the Ministry of Joy. And of course, this black, white, and yellow colour scheme would become synonymous with the Smiler. And as the ride neared completion, the marketing was ramped up. The Smiler logo was appearing on buildings everywhere. It appeared on the towers, and it was appearing around the capital, even on the Queen Elizabeth Clock Tower. And, quite bizarrely, on flocks of sheep in the countryside. By now, many roller coaster enthusiasts had begun to cotton on what the secret weapon projects would do, and many of them were trying to discern what this new 2013 roller coaster's big element was going to be. Now, Merlin wanted to go big with this one. They knew that they couldn't really take most of the world records. Tallest roller coaster? Can't do that because of the trees. Fastest roller coaster? Well, unless we want a mile-long launch track, we can't really do that either. Number of inversions, however, that's something we can do. In fact, the previous world record holder had been at another Merlin park, Colossus at Fort Park, with 10 inversions. Alton Towers was going to smash that with 14 on the Smiler. As the Smiler came closer and closer to its opening day, it became clear that the ride was having teething issues. The opening date was pushed back. In a press event, the car stopped at the top of the lift hill and the press had to be evacuated. When the ride eventually opened, it continued to have these teething issues. In one incident, a piece of track fell off, and the ride had to be evacuated and closed down for a number of weeks until the issue was sorted. A number of times the ride would stall on the lift hill, and sometimes, while it was going through testing, it would valley. This brings us on to the tragic events that took place in 2015. On this particular day, it was somewhat windy. In fact, it was above what Gerstlauer had intended the Smiler to be operated in, but nonetheless, Alton had continued to run the ride in these conditions. However, due to these conditions, there had become an issue with some trains going through the ride incredibly slowly, and so the decision was made to close the ride to basically assess whether it should continue running. Maintenance crews were basically seeing if there was any issues, and at the moment, all seemed fine. They had released a train around and it had done the circuit. so all seemed to be good. Unbeknownst to them, in the station, the ride operators had added the 5th train onto the circuit, using this moment of downtime to get the ride up to its full capacity. They, of course, had to send this 5th train around the circuit to make sure that it was all fine to go and that there was no issues. Which, it went by smoothly. The maintenance, by this point, had given the go-ahead for the ride to reopen. And the first train with passengers was loaded inside the station. However, that new 5th train that they had added had not actually made it around. It had valleyed. Valleying is a term when a roller coaster gets stuck between 2 hills. And it just sort of stops there. It doesn't have the momentum to make it over the next hill, so it just sort of goes back and forth until it rests. This had happened with that train. And the ride did what it was supposed to do. The train full of passengers made it to the top of the lift hill and stopped. The ride was aware that the next section of track was occupied. It's a very nifty system. Roller coasters are full of sensors like this that detect when a piece of track has a train on it. And so different sections of track are basically locked until it's free. And this is what happened. However, the maintenance crews, unaware that this new train had been added, and not actually seeing it in a visual inspection, decided that this had clearly been a computer bug and overrode it. Not too long after, the two trains collided. Luckily, no one died. But this was still an incredibly tragic event. Many of those guest lives were irreparably changed by what happened on that day. And Alton Towers themselves have said that this was the worst accident in the theme park's history. The trains, of course, had to be taken in for the damage done to them, and this led to a massive inquiry into the ride's safety. The ride would not open until the year after being heavily vetted. And for the victims, many of them would take Alton Towers to court, and Alton would pay a lot of money and lose a lot of the public's trust from this incident. Now, I want to make it clear that this was not the ride's fault. The Smiler actually did everything it could to prevent this. The blame for this incident lies on Alton Towers for operating the ride in these conditions, and on the park workers for overriding the ride's own safety measures to keep it running. So, I hope it's made clear that the Smiler is a perfectly safe ride. I've been on it multiple times, and I have never felt in danger. And I hope that this serves as a cautionary tale about those who are afraid of roller coasters, that even in these worst case scenarios, a ride will do anything to prevent an incident, such as the one that unfortunately happened in 2015. And so, on that rather macabre note, here is the POV of the Smiler.
Join us.
I still hate you, Smiler Vertical Lift Hill. You're the bane of my existence. And so, that brings us to what is currently the final secret weapon. Wicker Man.
WICKER. Book now at altontowers.com. Pay for the day, come back free all year.
So, Secret Weapon 8, or Wicker Man. Now, of course, you can see the length of time that has passed between these two. For a while, Alton Towers was afraid to introduce a new roller coaster to its lineup. Public perceptions of the park had been damaged. Trust had gone after the Smiler. However, Alton needed a way to show the public that what happened to the Smiler was a one-off, and not something that the park wanted a repeat of. And so, a new roller coaster was in the development. Going on the site of the old Flume ride would be a wooden roller coaster. This was somewhat interesting, as public perception viewed wooden coasters as old, rickety, unsafe. Not that this was Alton's first flirting with the idea of a wooden roller coaster. The most famous, of course, being the Across Valley roller coaster, which would have gone across the valley between Forbidden Valley and the Dark Forest, but was never built because of Alton locals complaining, as they always do. Another idea that was briefly tossed around was a Wallace and Gromit themed wooden roller coaster. However, this too fell through. However, drawing from traditional English legend would soon rise the Wicker Man, as construction would soon begin on the ride in 2017. Manufactured by Great Coasters International, it would be the first wooden roller coaster in the park, and would also be the first of the secret weapons to have a pre-show. Unless some of the rumors about NEMESIS' retrack are true, then it might still be the only one, at least for a year. Another main feature of Wicker Man was, well, the Wicker Man, with this giant structure being built to safely house both fire and wood, as these sections just where its shoulders are not wood, but actually painted metal. And this was, of course, caught on by the media, who, in, of course, the frenzy around the Smiler, try to make a big deal about Alton Towers building a wooden roller coaster with a fire theme. Completely missing the point that they're making this incredibly safe. Now, Wicker Man is the first of the secret weapons to not really have a defined world's first. It can't even claim to be the world's first fire and wood roller coaster, actually, as I believe that's already taken at, is it Kulmarden? It's either Kulmarden or Groneland. I know it's in Sweden. But nonetheless, Wicker Man has very quickly brought back the public trust. And it is one of Alton's most photogenic rides, especially if you're there during Scarefest, when they have those late opening hours. And you are lucky enough to wait in a 2-hour long line where halfway through the ride breaks down, but eventually you get to the front to enjoy it at night, and everyone else who's with you in your group has left, seeing it as a lost cause, and it's pouring down with rain. It was the best experience of my life. This ride runs incredibly fast at night. I bet the rain also helped a bit. And unfortunately I could not find a night POV that was good quality, so I hope you can forgive me for making you ride in daylight. And so, that's it then. Secret Weapons 1 through 8. But you're probably asking the question, what's next? Well, the answer is we don't really know. These have been all of the secret weapons that Alton Towers has done so far. And we don't really know when the next one is going to be. Towers has had a rocky history recently. The Smiler crash was one thing, but then, almost about 5 years after that, a global pandemic, forcing, of course, all major theme parks to shut down for 2 years. And even then, when they were allowed to reopen, it was only a limited offering, with how enjoyable of an experience it was, and of course, not many people willing to go to a theme park so soon after a global pandemic. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't anything promising, as we have Project Horizon. It is still very early days to actually know what this is. But you can clearly make out on these plans that there is a queue line going into this building. And this could be an indoor roller coaster of some description, which is what many are hoping it to be. I am one of those people. And given the budget for this new ride, maybe it is. Or maybe it's that horrifying duck that was on the flume. Thank you for watching this rather rambly video about Alton Towers and the Secret Weapons projects. I hope to see you again sometime for maybe another just one-off-the-cuff, random, history-oriented video like this, or some of my gaming content. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe, share the video with a friend, you know, all that YouTube business. And I will see you all next time. Thank you for watching.